Welcome to Idlewild Cottage, a quiet place where kindred spirits can linger together over a cup of tea, savoring all things lovely and cozy. My name is Juliana, and I'm delighted to have you. Each episode here at the cottage will center around a theme. That theme will be celebrated in a number of ways through literature, art, nature, and even some favorite movie scenes. We'll cherish the sweet and simple things of life. So make yourself at home, and I'll put the kettle on. A couple of weeks ago, I received a postcard in the mail. It was a thoughtful note sent by a friend, but here's the thing that was most touching about this gesture. This friend took the time to put pen to paper and write out her thoughts. She could have very efficiently sent a text my way, but instead she chose to sit, to slow down, to craft her words carefully without the convenience of backspace or delete. It reminds me of that line from Wendell Berry's Manifesto. He challenges the efficient ones. So, friends, every day do something that won't compute. Snail mail doesn't compute. It's not the way of efficiency, but it is a way to meaningfully connect with others. And so, during our time together today, we'll look at books, movies, poetry, and art that celebrate letter writing. It may even inspire you to write a letter of your own. Several years ago, I found a book at a garage sale. I think it might have been Rose in Bloom. Anyway, as I made my way back to the car with my treasure, I flipped dreamily through the pages. There, I discovered a postcard, which seemed to have been serving as a bookmark. A quick scan of the note made me consider that the owner might not have intended to part with it, so I ran back to the house and gave it to the man who was tending the till. As I drove away, I saw that he was absorbed in the note. Now, that's the end of the story, but my imagination wildly created its own narrative. I envisioned that postcard serving as some missing link in the history of this family. Perhaps it would solve a mystery, unite long lost friends, or rekindle a romance. Yes, I'm romanticizing this, but the truth is that letters can have a significant impact. Take, for instance, a certain letter composed by Beatrix Potter to a 5-year-old boy. In Margaret Lane's 1946 biography called The Tale of Beatrix Potter, we read about the blossoming of this artist. When he was 5 years old, Noel fell ill. Miss Potter began to write him letters. They were letters full of her own doings and the doings of her rabbit, Peter. They were also full of tiny and exquisite pictures. Sometimes, when things were duller than usual and there was really no news, the letters simply told a story, such as this, written on September 4th, 1893. My dear Noel, I don't know what to write you, so I shall tell you a story about 4 little rabbits whose names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank under the root of a big fir tree. And the rest is history. Beatrix Potter wasn't the only artist whose creativity influenced her letter writing. Tasha Tudor, author and illustrator of many children's books, operated a sparrow post when her children and later grandchildren were young. This was a miniature postal system through which birds, animals, and children could pass wee little letters. I experimented with this idea several months ago. I decided to mail a wee letter to my nieces. In order to make it as small as possible, I composed my note at the computer and used a tiny typewriter font. I made an envelope that was about 3 inches wide. There was just enough room for a stamp and address, and sure enough, it successfully made its way to my nieces. Several years ago, when I was reading a biography about the Bronte sisters, I learned about another letter writing technique that intrigued me. In order to economize and save paper when composing letters, the girls practiced cross-writing. This meant filling up a page with writing, then giving the paper a quarter turn and filling it again, thus making the most of this precious commodity. Let's look to Charlotte Bronte for today's poem, composed in 1848. The Letter by Charlotte Bronte. What is she writing? Watch her now, how fast her fingers move, how eagerly her youthful brow is bent in thought above. Her long curls drooping shade the light, she puts them quick aside, nor knows that band of crystals bright her hasty touch untied. It slips adown her silken dress, falls glittering at her feet. Unmarked it falls, for she no less pursues her labor sweet. In the life of Anne Shirley, a small bundle of letters becomes a treasured link to her past. We read about this sweet moment in Anne of the Island when Anne journeys to the home of her birth. The current tenant is happy to invite Anne in to explore the shabby yellow house. After Anne has roamed about, we read, when Anne went downstairs, the lady of the house met her in the hall. She held out a dusty little packet tied with faded blue ribbon. Here's a bundle of old letters I found in that closet upstairs when I came here, she said. You can take 'em if you'd care to have 'em. Oh, thank you, cried Anne, clasping the packet rapturously. We later read that Anne shut herself up in her room and read the letters. Some were written by her father, some by her mother. The letters were tender, intimate, sacred. To Anne, the sweetest of all was the one written after her birth. I love her best when she is asleep, and better still when she is awake. Anne reflects, this has been the most beautiful day of my life. I've found my father and mother. Letters also serve the purpose of extending gratitude. Mr. Lawrence's letter to Beth in Little Women is a moving example of this. Mr. Lawrence has made his piano available to shy Beth, and she quietly slips back and forth to his grand home to play it as often as she can. By way of thanks, Beth decides to make a pair of slippers for Mr. Lawrence. His own gratitude is expressed in the gift of a piano and a very distinguished note. Dear Madam, I have had many pairs of slippers in my life, but I never had any that suited me so well as yours. I like to pay my debts, so I know you will allow the old gentleman to send you something which once belonged to the little granddaughter he lost. With hearty thanks and best wishes, I remain your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence. Let's linger a bit longer with the March family and draw around the fire as Marmee reads the precious letter sent home from the war by Father. This is probably the most recognizable scene from Little Women, and it will serve as our art focus for today. Jessie Wilcox Smith was an American illustrator who lived from 1863 to 1935. The Little Women edition, which she illustrated, was published in 1915, and this scene is called The Letter. Smith uses warm and inviting colors in this scene, and you can just hear the familiar words. Give them all my dear love and a kiss. Tell them I think of them by day, pray for them by night, and find my best comfort in their affection at all times. Not surprisingly, Jessie Wilcox Smith was also commissioned to illustrate the beloved classic Heidi. Toward the end of the story, we see a letter of friendship and anticipation shared between two kindred spirits. Clara, who is in poor health, lives in the city. A trip to visit Heidi and the fresh mountain air is the doctor's prescription. Heidi is hungry for this news and eagerly reads Clara's letter. Dear Heidi, in 2 or 3 days we shall start on our journey. The doctor comes every day and calls out, away to the Alps. He is very impatient for us to start. If you could only know how much he liked to be on the Alps. He tells me all about the days he spent with you and the grandfather, and about the mountains and the flowers and the splendid fresh air. Everybody must get well up there, he said. Oh, how happy I feel to think that I shall be with you on the Alps. For our cinematic roundup today, we'll take a look at some humorous aspects of letter writing. First up, we have On Moonlight Bay, a 1951 film starring Doris Day and Gordon MacRae. Marjorie Winfield has fallen in love with the boy next door and accordingly writes him a love letter. While she's writing, she's called away, and the letter is temporarily left on her desk. This is when her brother Wesley appears on the scene. Wesley is desperate for a school writing assignment, so he hastily snatches it up without reading it and tries to pass it off as his homework. Of course, this would be the assignment the teacher has her class read aloud. Next up, we have the 1996 adaptation of Emma, based on the Austen classic. Emma and her small community of friends have gathered at the Westons for a party. Mr. Weston is very eager to share the contents of a letter with his guests. His son, Frank Churchill, has written. Emma is just as eager to hear the update. Alas, she only catches snatches here and there, for the persistent Mr. Elton keeps drawing Emma away from the riveting news. Just as Mr. Weston begins to share an interesting tidbit, my son Frank has written and told us something most exciting. Mr. Elton pulls Emma away. Miss Woodhouse, are you warm enough? Several similar interruptions take place, and when Emma finally rejoins Mr. Weston, she is just in time to hear him say, and that was the end of the letter. Well, friends, we are at the end of our letter today as well. By way of a postscript, we'll check in with the Idlewild Post. After listening to last week's episode, Emily shared about the significance of watching football games with her grandpa. Emily writes that her grandparents are transitioning to assisted living, so bonding over an afternoon college game with her grandpa this past weekend was especially meaningful and cozy. It represented something familiar and constant for him in a season of change. Thank you, Emily, for sharing how you cherish the sweet and simple things of life. Kindred Spirits, if you'd like to reach out and share, you can find me on Instagram at Idlewild Cottage. And as we continue to grow our community, your likes, shares, and positive reviews will help us reach other kindred spirits. Finally, let's open to Psalm 19, in which we see God's letter to us written across the skies. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. Kindred spirits, would we too be inspired by the beauty of God's penmanship this week? Thank you for joining me today, dear ones. Please come again soon to Idlewild Cottage.